Hello, welcome to the Irish Left Archive podcast. In this episode we talk to Stan Erraught about his book Rebel Notes, Popular Music and Conflict in Ireland. We discuss Stan's own political background and work leading to his research for the book, the different facets of Irish popular music since the mid-20th century, the particular cases of the Wolfe Tones and Kneecap and perceptions of their political and Irish cultural expression, and the changing relationship between popular music and republicanism, politics more broadly, and Irish culture and language. Stan is a lecturer in the School of Music at the University of Leeds. His research includes popular music and aesthetics, the political economy of the music industry and critical theory. As well as several journal articles he previously published on music, value and utopia, Nostalgia for an Age Yet to Come in 2018. Before moving to academia, Stan was a member of the band The Stars of Heaven in the 1980s. Rebel Notes is published by Beyond the Pale Books. It's available from their website and you'll find a link in the attached notes. You'll find the Irish Left Archive at leftarchive.ie. As ever, we welcome your feedback. You can contact us via the website or email us at contact@leftarchive.ie. Thanks to Stan for taking the time to talk to us. We began by asking about his own experience of politics.
Well, in terms of my own political background, I mean, I've been in two political parties, both Labour parties, one in Ireland, one in Britain, both very briefly. Bit longer in the Irish Labour Party, I think. Most recently, I joined the Labour Party here after Corbyn was elected. Was active in a local branch in Buckinghamshire in Wickham, which weirdly then was a completely unwinnable seat. And thanks to Steve Baker, it's now a marginal, although the Lib Dems will probably take it rather than Labour. That's the closest I've got to politics on the ground in this country. It was interesting to sort of meet Labour people who had put their lives into, as I say, a pretty unwinnable Westminster seat and a pretty unwinnable council. It was interesting as well because almost all of the Labour councillors were Asian in a town with a substantial Asian population. And it was one of those, you sort of normally imagine that the north of England is poor and working class, the south of England is rich. And Buckinghamshire is, I think, outside bits of London, one of the richest parts of the country. But Wickham was the classic sort of donut where you've got a poor town surrounded by extremely rich villages. The Chalfonts, for example, Chalfont St. Peter's and Chalfont St. Giles, where Paul Weller and Noel Gallagher live in their respective mansions. But the town itself was quite deprived. It had used to be a centre of furniture making, which, of course, IKEA make everybody's furniture these days, so nobody does. And the history of chair making, I won't go into this because it's too long, but it was one of those towns that because the industry was effectively piecework, people made chairs in their own homes, or bits of chairs, and then brought them to the factory. No. It was a town that was endemically poor, if that makes sense, a town that had always been poor and had never found a replacement industry to take it up. But anyway, substantial Asian population, certain amount of racial tension in the town. But that, again, I discovered, again, as I should have known, that I'm really bad at political organisation and I'm really bad at being in a political party. There were sort of three factions, the old sort of generally white trade unionists, the main power block in the town who were generally Asian, who were sort of familiar enough from Irish politics. They were the sort of guys that would have been probably in Fianna Fáil 30 years ago. They were generally honest, upstanding, but they were fighting on local issues. And then there was an influx of people like me who joined after the Corbyn, and there was a lot of the sort of leftists who were all theory and generally sort of understood everything from the point of view of somebody who'd never had to struggle for anything. So it got quite. There was a lot of lectures about how how you're just not being socialist enough here.
That's always good to hear.
That's my most recent experience of organised politics.
Yeah, and so you would consider yourself obviously to be left wing.
Yeah. I can't remember a time when I didn't. I grew up in a household that was political in a particular way, in that politics was talked about all the time. And if you spoke during the news, you were pretty much at risk of excommunication. You would have been expected to know who the minister for X or Y, Z was.
Right.
My parents were not particularly religious, and they certainly weren't left wing, but I think the cardinal sin would have been not voting. I think if I told either of them that I hadn't bothered going to the ballot box or something like that, that would have been a not, we're not speaking to you anymore kind of thing.
Yeah.
My dad's politics were basically old school Fianna Fáil, small R Republican. He was from Kerry, difficult childhood, joined the army, moved to Dublin. Well, we moved around the country a lot actually as a kid, but I think he was a devil era Republican, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah.
My mother, on the other hand, grew up in South County Dublin, probably voted Fine Gael most of her life, although she wouldn't tell me. But was socially very progressive and quite involved with, firstly, the ICA and then the Council for the Status of Women. Was a staunch feminist, unapologetically so, and probably a much bigger influence than my dad, actually. For that in particular, for feminism.
So was it a current through your thinking then that drew you towards topics like this when you became involved in academia? Or was it something that you saw to one side and then you slowly moved towards it?
No, I think, I think punk rock is to blame.
This is becoming a thread on these podcasts. Please continue.
I mean, I was the perfect age for it. I was born in 1960, so I was 16 in 1976.
Yeah.
And hearing the First Clash album was sort of, oh my God, this music. I was already obsessed with music and already had been for a long time, but this joined an awful lot of dots very, very quickly.
Yeah.
A lot of things that I had been dimly aware of. So, for example, the politics of race in this country. I've been listening to reggae and I've been aware of it beforehand, but suddenly understanding that, white kids have grown up with this too in London and grown up with it, not as something you heard about the enemy or something like that, but something that and all of that just opened up an awful lot straight away and connected the things I was into as, not as a consumer, but, the absolute obsession with music, connected that up with politics in a very, very direct way. It's possible to be cynical about the Clash and, for all sorts of reasons. I can't deny it. And that sort of led to lots of other things pretty quickly. The Mekons, who I saw this weekend, 46 years after I first saw them, have always been a big influence, and one that's grown over the years. So, for example, they're on an LP, their LP Honky Tonkin', where there's quotes from Wittgenstein, from Adorno, you sort of realize that you could do this stuff. You could play rock and roll, you could play stuff that was accessible, but you didn't have to be stupid about it.
Yeah,
and there was no shame in reading books occasionally and attempting to connect the two things. So, when coming back to academia, I did. So after the Stars I haven't finished, and after the bands that I've been involved in sort of reached their necessary end.
And they had there was a political angle with them as well. Like, you can't look at those
with the Stars, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, like it was adjacent anyway. You can't look at the record trees.
So we were, again, I suppose, much like my own family, we were all sort of fairly political in different ways, but I think we were guilty of the same sort of thing that I say in the book. We didn't particularly want to comment on situations that we were a little bit unsure about. Yeah. Unfortunately, didn't agree about either.
Yeah.
But when I sort of found my way back into academia, I actually did a philosophy PhD. I didn't want to go anywhere near music. I was sick of the music business. I was sick of talking about music. I was sick of all of that.
Right.
But jobs in philosophy were even rarer than jobs in music. And I completely by chance heard about a job in Bucks University, where I ended up working for nearly 5 years. First part-time, and I was there for 2 hours and I was offered a full-time job. They were that desperate for staff. So I ended up teaching in, again, the sort of academic environment that I don't think there's anywhere in Ireland that would be similar. It's the Post-92 University, which is effectively somewhere that was a further education provider, jumped on the bandwagon with a massive expansion in university education here. People in the town of Wickham say that a couple of perfectly good institutions were ruined by turning them into a university. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. One of the things, for example, as I was saying earlier, Wickham was the centre of the furniture trade, and there was a really good furniture college where furniture, G-Plan, for example, were based in Wickham. So there was was a tradition of furniture design and so forth, which was brought into the university and then closed. So, 150 years of craftsmanship and 150 years of skill was just, demolished, and, all sorts of other fashionable things brought in their place. Right. There would also been an art college, which again barely exists in its current form. But anyway, I ended up there teaching music management, which was effectively trying to explain to people that there was no money in the music business anymore and go and do something else, which is what I tend to do a lot of the time these days as well. Anyway, I left that because they put me in charge of a struggling department, and I realized that I was being put in charge in order to get rid of people, which I didn't want to do, because I thought the reason we were closing wasn't our fault. It was to do with exceptionally bad management further up. Familiar enough story. So I left there intending to move back to Dublin, but then I heard about a job here, applied for it, not expecting to get it, got it. It was meant to be fractional. It was meant to be a couple of days a week, and then, as seems to happen very quick, suddenly it was full time. Right. So I've been here for 7 years now. When I joined, I was the 0.5 that was teaching popular music. We now have 4.5 teaching popular music. These used to be, it prided itself on teaching modernist composition and teaching. I shouldn't be saying this really, but anyway. But we've, we're slowly polluting the place with our noise.
Okay, good. I think excellent. And so, was it out of your work there that you went down this particular path? Because I know you've been doing papers assiduously and research.
Okay, so I suppose the first thing actually, I started maybe when I started here, I started thinking about the show band thing, and started thinking about country, particularly about country music in relation to Ireland, because I'd grown less and less satisfied with the old-fashioned. The show bands were rubbish. They were backward-looking. They were terrible. Rock music saved us from being regrettably unmodern. Yeah. I started thinking about the idea that sort of particular narrative of modernization in Ireland was just a little bit too cozy. Yeah. And that's when I began to sort of think about the idea of rock music being the handmaiden of neoliberalism sometimes, rather than any sort of oppositional form or having any sort of oppositional force. And I'm not the first person to think this, obviously, but thinking about this in Irish terms was, so that produced a paper on country Irish music, where I sort of explored some of this. But I think that the impetus for this, quite honestly, it was that Steve Coogan sketch, and then more immediately the furore over Towngate, as it was when Charlie Flanagan attempted a commemoration of the RIC. And having grown up in Ireland through the Troubles, and when rebel songs were not something that were heard on the radio, not something where there was this sort of 90-degree turn away from any expression of republicanism. And again, as I say in the book, from about 1972 onwards. And I began thinking about this, and I just thought, okay, this is interesting. This is a point where popular music and politics are intersecting in a way that's at a very, very specific point. And whereas I don't think it necessarily swung the election in 2020, it was certainly something that was talked about. Yeah. There was a particular song in the air. And then I sort of started thinking about the song itself. I'd always been interested in Dominic Behan's writing. I'd been not particularly the stuff that built on rebel songs, but things like Building Up and Tearing England Down, or McAlpine's Fusiliers, those songs. Yeah. I'd always thought were fascinating documents. And I always thought as well they're underappreciated, I suppose, which again tied in with something that I've always, and maybe become more aware of since I've been living here, is how it's changed, but I think how little attention is paid to the hundreds of thousands of Irish people who came over here after the war, and the effect those people had on British life, but also the effect Britain had on them, the effect it had back home, all of those things sort of intersected. So I started writing about Come Out You Black and Tans, and I started writing about that particular thing, presented it as a paper at a conference in, I think, 2021, got some reasonable feedback from it. And I thought then, I started thinking, okay, this is a journal article at least, which I wrote. It got rejected rather rudely, I thought. I mean, I know we're all sensitive to rejection, but, I've had stuff rejected before and not particularly taken it badly, but this felt like it was being rejected because whoever read it didn't particularly like the politics of it, rather than because it was a
Right.
bad piece of research.
Yeah, yeah.
Although that's the way it was turned out. So having got the bit between my teeth, I didn't want to let it go.
Mm.
And then, of course, more things started happening straight away. The whole controversy over Celtic Symphony.
Yeah.
And that tied in, of course, with something else I'm interested in, which is football.
Yeah.
And the politics around sport in Ireland. And of course, even before that happened, I'd been sort of horrified at the way the FAI were treating the women's team and so forth. So all of this, it felt to me like it just begged to be written about. The difficulty, as I said, with this book was this stuff kept happening. I mean, it wouldn't just lie down and be over.
Yeah.
Most particularly, of course, with Kneecap.
Yeah.
Who, if they just sort of stayed a small band from Belfast, it would have been a lot easier.
Yeah. That wasn't going to happen.
No.
So essentially, like what happened was it cohered.
Yeah.
You lead in a sense with Celtic Symphony and Zombie. Zombie is important by the Cranberries.
Yeah.
Interestingly, not so strongly with U2's contribution to this Sunday Bloody Sunday, which you seem to almost park to one side. Is there a particular reason for, or not park to one side, that's not fair, but I mean, is there a reason for that? Or do you just think, were you talking more about the contemporary as distinct from the past?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think talking about the Cranberries was just because of the way in which Zombie was promoted as, the antidote to Celtic Symphony. And I thought that was a bit, well, I thought it was just ham-fisted for a start.
Yeah.
I have to say, I always detested the song. I always thought it was just completely shallow and vapid. And if you needed a warning against talking about politics when you don't really know what you're talking about, that it's a really, really good example of that.
Yeah.
In terms of not talking about Sunday Bloody Sunday, I'm not quite sure why I didn't, except maybe that I think U2 have been written about so much that there's not really a whole lot else to say.
Yeah.
Like I say, there's a bit, I tried to, or I did as much as I could to try and find out what a comment there was by bands from the Republic on events up north over the course of the Troubles. And I'm pretty sure I unearthed nearly all of them, or at least as many as I asked a lot of people what they remembered, if anybody. And it is sort of astonishing. I think I would suggest there's probably more songs by British bands about the North than there are songs by Irish bands, by bands from the South, which again is a little bit strange, I suppose, to say the least. Not that stuff from this side of the Irish Seas, isn't problematic. Like even the Gang of Four with the Best Intentions, I think Armalite Rifle is ever so slightly patronising.
Yeah.
Some of it's some of its eagerness to explain Ireland to us.
Or Easter House. Easter House
are fascinating.
Yeah.
I remember them because they were on Rough Trade at the same time as we were.
Right.
And people in Rough Trade were always trying to say, so what do you think? And we were a little bit aghast at some of it, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. They could write a tune.
They could write a tune, yeah.
They really could.
They were kind of about, a Republican alarm or something like that.
Yeah. In a way, because it's such a huge area. One of the most interesting aspects for me reading the book was, and I have to say my own prejudice slot very neatly into what you're saying there. I mean, I think the show bands are under-regarded as a modernizing influence. The way that, in a sense, they wrestle control of popular culture, musical popular culture from the church. But something that you really hone in on is, that in the late 60s into the early 70s, there were three contending forces in music. One was the show bands, which were a live phenomena, but not a recorded phenomena to any great extent. Secondly, that you had the balladeers, and we can kind of incorporate folk and trad into that. And they were sort of the second force, and they had moved into the pubs after the 50s. And then third, you had rock and pop music, which was very much in a sort of tertiary place and was coming up. But something that I think really, really gets the point of your thing is, you make the argument that none of this is recorded in any detail in historiography from this period. That in actual fact, popular culture in Ireland is regarded as being a literary popular culture. And where it's politicised and what have you, even though music was politicised, in interesting ways as you would. So would you like to expand on that maybe a little
Yeah,
bit?
well,
And those traditions and how they were working out at that period?
yeah, well, that's one thing. I mean, I'm not a historian, so, but I mean, I've read enough. I've read enough history, and I've read J.J. and I've read various
Mm,
things. But you know, I sort of had an idea of the sort of, and I was familiar with the whole revisionist, anti-revisionist stuff and all
mm,
that sort of thing. I had a vague idea of the field, and I started thinking, okay, somebody's got to have written about this stuff before, because Ireland was changing dramatically during the 1960s.
mm.
The show band industry was a big industry. Somebody must have thought this was interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the sheer amount of money. I mean, maybe the taxman wasn't seeing very much of it, but the sheer amount of money that was rolling around within the industry given how under-industrialized the country was in other respects,
Mm.
the fact that there must have been, if there were 800 bands, that's 800 bands by six people, six eights, that's 4,000 people or something like that. Like, it's sort of astonishing to me how little regard is paid just to the fact that it existed and just to the fact that this is what people were doing
Mm.
with their lives.
Mm.
So two things struck me. One is that you can't imagine a history of Britain in the 60s that doesn't mention the Beatles, or doesn't mention more than just the Beatles, doesn't talk about rock and pop music in some detail.
Mm.
You equally couldn't imagine a history of the US in the 60s that doesn't talk about the civil rights movement, or something that doesn't talk about soul music. And yet people write about politics in Ireland and social history and don't pay any attention to what people were listening to, what people were doing with their leisure time, what people were interested in.
Mm.
People will talk at length about literary culture, about drama, sometimes about serious movies, art house movies and stuff like that.
Mm.
But popular culture it's not completely neglected, but compared to the attention paid to popular culture here and in America, it's sort of astonishing, because Irish historians, Irish sociologists, Irish people who write about music in Ireland, we read stuff that's written elsewhere.
Mm.
We know what people are doing elsewhere. We base our theoretical frameworks on stuff from the rest of the world. We don't make stuff up out of thin air.
Mm.
But Irish studies is so literary focused.
Mm.
And yes, Ireland has a very strong literary culture, and there may be some evidence that Irish people read a little bit more and pay a little bit more attention. I don't know. But when I was a teenager, David Bowie meant an awful lot more to me than, think of an example, Tom Murphy or something like that. I mean, I wasn't interested in what was going on in the Abbey. I was fascinated by what was going on in the NME.
Yeah,
that was the culture I grew up with.
Yeah,
I wasn't illiterate. I did read, but the fact that almost none of the history I read from straightforward academic Irish history pays anything more than sort of cursory attention to this. That strikes me strongly, and still does.
And do you think it therefore underplays like the significance of these cultural manifestations? I mean, for want of a better word, yeah.
Yeah, it did. I mean, let me give you an example. Between when we were talking earlier and now, I went for a walk into town and past the Leeds City Museum, and it has an exhibition at the moment called Goth City about Goths in Leeds. Yeah, I was trying and failing to imagine the National Museum in Ireland, or the municipal, or any museum in Ireland, paying that much attention to a popular subculture.
Yeah, Irish punk, perfect example.
Now, Leeds is rather self-mockingly, is pleased with being Goth City.
Oh, of God.
It sort of is.
Yeah.
But the fact that the museum, and they're not doing this in a look at us and they're quite serious about it. They think this is important. They think it's interesting and important that for the last 30 years, the city has been identified with people with,
Yeah.
And the exhibition isn't open yet, but I'll go and have a look.
You go, yeah. Reading the book, you make the point very clearly. Things that happened in the North, the Miami Show Band, as we've mentioned just a second ago, being a perfect example, but also Bloody Sunday, and then events afterwards when there was a sort of revulsion at aspects of the violence, a very strong and deep-rooted revulsion, which saw, in some respects, the ballad scene and the rebel scene, rebel song scene seemed to kind of dip down. And your book charts this perfectly. I mean, but then, as you say, like, in comes rock and pop and punk and new wave, and it sort of fits into a vacuum where it has opened up because the show bands have begun to collapse, and then on the other side, the ballad scene has weakened, for want of a better term. you talk about with the Wolfe Tones, there was a banishment almost from the public space.
Yeah.
Do you think that was political and economic, or do you think it was mostly political or was partly economic? And then taking the Wolfe Tones to where they came from, perhaps that'd be interesting to look at as well.
I think some of it, again, the Wolfe Tones are good at curating their own mythology, I think. For men who are like approaching 80, they're very media savvy these days, I think, or somebody is on the, no, it's patronising to say somebody is on their behalf. I think they actually know what they're doing themselves. I think they've managed to turn themselves into something almost camp, which for men who dress as they do and look as they do is a bit strange. But I think they understand as well that what people are celebrating is not physical force republicanism.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about this is for the first time, we're beginning to see a certain amount of popular culture nostalgia in Ireland, that it almost swamps you here in Britain, where one of the more depressing things is that I teach a module on popular music in the 60s, and everyone wants to write about the Beatles. They're 20, and they want to write about a band that broke up 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And getting them interested, getting them to see beyond that. You know, there was a lot more interesting stuff going on. There was some of them do, I mean, quite a lot of them do, but there's always a boy who knows everything about the Beatles and just wants to tell you that. But I think Ireland has always been spared that, mainly because there's very little to be nostalgic about. I mean, nobody particularly wants to go back to the 50s and go back to mass poverty, migration, and so forth. But I think we're beginning to see the start of that. I mean, that Ballroom Blitz thing on the show bands, was a bit, you know, it's slowly, maybe it's not coming into focus so much as going out of focus, but maybe people we're beginning to develop that sort of, that industry of wasn't it great back then thing. And I think the Wolfe Tones are doing that a little bit at the moment. So it's not like they want to go back to fighting the towns, but they want to go back to when you could sing that sort of thing with and not feel. I'm not sure, but maybe it's because it doesn't really mean anything very much anymore to anyone, that it's possible for 10,000 people to sing it at Electric Make and not feel like they're doing a little bit more than just being a little bit naughty.
Well, this brings me to football. I mean, do you feel, and from what you're saying, to me, what you're saying sounds remarkably similar in a sense to what happened around 1990 with football, with soccer.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I are of an age where there's only a few years between us. And I mean, where the Irish flag, the tricolour, was regarded with antipathy at best, despite the fact it was the emblem of the Republic of Ireland. And yet, 1990, suddenly, 89, in fairness, 89, 90, all of that shifted around, where it then became entirely legitimate in the public space in a way that it simply hadn't been for the previous, I would say, 20, 25 years.
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, do you think that that's the dynamic that went, that in a sense, with the Wolfe Tones, and we can talk about Kneecap as well, that you've got a situation where because these things are behind us, or there's just been a shift, you know, it's 30 odd years since the Good Friday Agreement. That's ancient history for.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah. I hadn't actually sort of connected the two. The idea of the sort of rediscovery of the tricolour in the context of football, the rediscovery of that sort of soft republicanism. I do, in terms of thinking about the connections between music and football. Again, one of the things that I think goes alongside what I was talking about, the lack of interest or lack of concern with popular music and with popular culture, is that I suppose because the GAA is more distinctive and more interesting, that its place in Irish society tends to be slightly, not that it's not important and not that it doesn't occupy a very significant social space, but I think football is undervalued in terms of its appeal, in terms of the number of people who play it, and in terms of, you know, you'll get the general derision for Irish people who follow British teams and blah, 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 and so forth. They forget that an awful lot of that connection is fostered through emigration. A lot of people support the team that people from their family support. Yeah. And it's been overlaid a little bit in the Premiership era by the Manchester Uniteds and the Chelseas and the Man Cities and stuff. But there are a lot of Irish people who support it. I mean, I occasionally make the mistake of booking a flight to Leeds on a Saturday morning and realising that it's going to be full of Leeds United fans. Yeah. There are an unbelievable number of Leeds United fans in Dublin. For a team I've been in the Championship for most of the time I've been here, it's astonishing. You can have a plane load of Leeds fans and me. And, at least in the city, I can go somewhere else. But
Yeah.
it's actually worse going back on a Saturday night when they've been at the game and are pissed afterwards. But
It's so true. Liverpool, Man City, Man United, well, Man City as well, if you can think of it. Yeah.
And it's, I mean, the League of Ireland family says, well, you should be going, you should be supporting your local team, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. But it's not all glory hunting, and it's not all people hypnotized by the glamour of the Premiership. It goes a lot deeper than that. I mean, my former partner's family most of our extended family are in Birmingham, and they're all Villa fans. And that's a way of sort of building a composite identity, because I think most Irish Brummies support Villa. I'm not quite sure. There's probably quite a few who don't, but it definitely feels like Villa are the Irish team in Birmingham. And those threads of identity that connect working class Ireland with working class Britain via football, via music, that stuff it rarely makes its way into Irish history, certainly.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I think when people are talking about, when the ongoing discussions about immigration in this country go on, and the storm are going lower than you imagined you would ever go today. But the Irish we're in a strange liminal position, because we're now kind of invisible here. And even if people know we're Irish, or people hear the accent or so forth, it means very little anymore.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be, people will be quite, again, not particularly to me, but other Irish people have told me that people will assume that you are quite happy to be included in us, white Britain, so that you can be racist about them.
Yeah.
Our status as immigrants is almost occluded here. But I think that stuff I was talking about, that were those connections via football, via music, and so forth. I think there's a culture there that understands something about the relationship between these two islands that is missing from an awful lot of official history, which understands both the close connections, but also understands the painful bits as well.
Yeah. When I was growing up, the Wolfe Tones they just weren't on the radar for me.
No.
Going to school in Kilbarrack circa 1980, I was 15 in 1980, and they just weren't a part of my life. And I think that's because the generation, similar, essentially same generation as yourself, actually, but just kind of fell a little between what came before and then what came after. And like punk was very much maybe more heavy rock as it was down my neck of the woods, and disco and and so forth, pop music. And I just wondered, like, in a sense, they were regarded as kitsch, in the same way as Round Towers on our school books were kitsch, and Celtic Interlace was kitsch on our stuff. And yet, somehow they maintained right through all of that, even after, when things went south for the balladeers and the rebel songs and so forth, they maintained an ability to put out albums, and they obviously had a fan base right through the 80s.
I mean, do you remember, because I certainly remember they had a residency in the Wexford Inn, what's now, it's Opium now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. They had a residency there for a long time. So that place, what held 600-700 people or something like that. And they could definitely fill that all the time. They also had, of course, there was the US where they toured. They were managed for a long time by Bill Fuller. And Bill Fuller is somebody who deserves somebody should write a book about Bill Fuller, because the history of modern Irish entertainment starts with. They also, of course, there was also the West of Scotland connection. There was also the Celtic connection.
Yeah.
And so the whole history of sectarianism around football in Scotland is obviously extremely fraught, but also there's an awful lot of both sidism from the Scottish government and it's reflected in the legislation, which is that Rangers and Celtic, the two sides of the same coin, they're really not, for all sorts of obvious reasons. Celtic's fan base has always been left-wing and is leftist about things that have nothing to do with Ireland. Rangers have an awful lot of connections with the right, which is not to say that all Rangers fans are right-wing and all Celtic fans are. Obviously, that's not true.
Yeah.
But the two Rangers fans singing songs about being up to their necks in Fenian blood, singing the Billy Boys, is not the same thing as Celtic fans singing A Nation Once Again or singing Mary Black and Towns or something like that, or Celtic Symphony. But so Celtic Football Club were very happy to have the Wolfe Tones as their house band for a long time.
Right.
Played there quite often. There's a video for Celtic Symphony. It's a really terrible video.
Yeah.
But it's filmed in Parkhead. It's filmed on Celtic's own turf. I doubt if they snuck in first thing in the morning and didn't tell anybody. I'm pretty sure that the club were on board with this.
Yeah.
So the club now tries to have nothing to do with it. Celtic find themselves in trouble with UEFA all the time because of the fan base, generally speaking, anti-colonialist protesting activities. And to be fair to the club, they tend to defend their fans on things like that. But yeah, the Wolfe Tones are now, outside that circle.
So they moved from being kitsch in a sense to maintaining a fan base. And then in 2002, there's that bizarre Late Late Show, which you recount in I think, necessary detail, where they were essentially ambushed by the great and the good in official Ireland.
Yeah.
They were always quite circumspect about open identification with, say, the contemporary IRA. They did mention NORAID and so on and so forth, but it was very much in the sense of, well, we're not going to write songs that people are going to give money to NORAID for, which I thought was a fair point. But sorry, in 2002, they're then, that's an interesting one, because the figure who's in that reappears in this narrative again, or at least one of the central figures.
2002?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our conscience.
Yeah. I just found that interview extremely, they're a band that weren't, as you said, they're a band that weren't even that popular at that time. They certainly, they weren't having hits or anything like that. They weren't, but yet RT felt they couldn't have them on without ambushing them, without putting them up against somebody who's a political correspondent. The fact that somebody who was the political correspondent for the Irish Times at the time felt that he should be there was also interesting. Also, the fact that there were 4 questions from the audience and 2 of them were from journalists, clearly, and Doherty was definitely, set up to attack them, and with quite straightforward classist contempt for their audience, which is also interesting.
Yeah, big time.
I think for a particular segment of the Irish establishment at the time, they were, remember, at that point, I checked this, there was an election in 2002, I think. And I think Sinn Féin got slightly over 2% of the vote. I think the only TD they returned that year was Cuireann Quailon. And yet there was what turns out to be a relatively justified fear on behalf of the 2 big parties that there was the potential for Sinn Féin to become a major player in Irish politics. And I think they were, as events have proved, they were probably afraid of that. And they probably thought that if the sort of thing that the Wolfe Tones were doing was normalised, then that would make voting Sinn Féin okay, or something like that. And I think that's what the fear was. There was always, of course, the complete contradiction that everybody was pushing Sinn Féin into government in the north, but mortally afraid of Sinn Féin in government in the south, the Republic.
Yeah.
You were asking unionists in the north to accede to being government by a party that they detested, and sometimes for quite justifiable personal reasons. But there was no possible way that they could be allowed into government in the Republic because they're anti-democratic, because they're run by the Army Council, they're run and so forth. So there was always that contradiction. But I think that's the root of it. I think for certain figures in the Republic, it's a fear of it's a Red Scare.
Yeah.
Which again, I don't have a huge amount of hope that Sinn Féin will usher in a socialist republic or social democratic one. Yeah. I have to say, but I think there's always been that. I've been reading a biography of Sean McBride recently, and the inability of socialism and republicanism to exist comfortably in the same party seems to be just one of those perennial problems that we'll never fix.
Yeah, in Ireland.
In Ireland, anyway.
I hope you're wrong.
I hope I am too, but
yeah. So you get this pile in on the Wolfe Tones in 2002. It is amazing. It's like if they were trying to extirpate them from the Irish public cultural consciousness, it didn't work.
No.
There is the whole thing that, in a sense, the more there is of them, the more it kind of demonstrates the conflict is over, at least in its hard edge. Obviously, there's political aspects which we can go into, but then we get to Kneecap.
Yeah.
who in a sense are a million miles away from the Wolfe Tones in terms of their musical form and all the rest of it. Perhaps you'd like to talk a bit about Kneecap, and then we can do a little compare and contrast with.
Yeah. Well, as I say in the book, for me, one of the most interesting things about Kneecap, I mean, they keep coming up with more interesting things about themselves. But one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is the fact that they rap in Irish.
Yeah.
And the ways in which the Irish language, which again, your generation and mine growing up in school, we had to do it. But I actually went to school through the medium for quite a few years. So there's some buried fluency in there that occasionally I find I can construct a sentence in Irish without thinking about it, and then I can't get to the next sentence because it's gone again. I think most of us had accepted the fact that Irish was a language that was being preserved in aspect, but was never really going to be part of popular culture in any sort of real sense of the word. Occasionally you paid lip service to it, occasionally, and you might, that usual Irish regret that, I wish I had more Irish. And suddenly you have a band from Belfast who seem to live there most of their life. They talk Irish all the time, but a very particular kind of Irish that's not the Irish we learned. It's almost creolized. It adopts Black American slang, for example, into it. Perfectly happy with going back and forth between Irish and English, and they're not doing it because they're not doing it to preserve the language. They're not doing it for any of those reasons. They're doing it because this is their culture. But it's a culture that's at best 50 years old. The idea of there being an Irish-speaking part, there being a Gaelic quarter in Belfast. And I can't pretend to understand it completely, but I find that completely fascinating. I find it fascinating that something that was almost as far apart from being anything cool, or hip, trendy, cutting edge, or something like that for most of us, it suddenly became, oh, they're doing this.
Yeah.
What's even more interesting is that I've seen them in Leeds twice. And I mean, the last time I saw them, they played 2 nights in the Irish Centre. So that's 2,400 people.
Right.
I can't think of another band not performing. Well, there probably are bands not performing in English, and I'm just not thinking about it. But it's actually kind of fascinating. And in both times I've seen them, there's been Irish people in the audience, but the majority of the audience, the overwhelming majority of the audience, are people who are into them because they're into hip hop, not because there's any particular Irish identification, but they enjoy it. They'll sing along, get your Brits out. I don't know. I find it just completely fascinating watching it.
Yeah.
And weirdly, I've never seen them in Ireland. I mean, I suppose one of the obvious things is that, I mean, the Irish education system did its very best to make Irish so boring that you wouldn't want to ever do it again.
Yeah.
And it was almost, how not to revive a language, I think. I think a lot of the literature, I've read as much as I can on this to try and sort of understand it and understand comparative cases. I mean, in the book I compare it to Welsh, which is completely different. Welsh remains a vernacular language for 250,000 people. Yeah. If you're in North Wales, you'll hear Welsh spoken absolutely in every context, and consequently, there's a lot of Welsh language music. And nobody's ever sort of thought, well, you can't do hip hop in Welsh, you can't do punk in Welsh, you can't do because they just did all the way back to the 70s and before.
I grew up listening to Gorky's Psychotic Monkey. Fantastic. No idea what they're saying.
Or you mentioned Gweno, who doesn't just sing in Welsh, but sings in Cornish as well.
Sings in Cornish,
right?
I saw Advaith in
a
couple of months ago in Hyde Park Book Club, maybe small venue, maybe the size of the smaller Whelan's. Did the set entirely in Welsh. There were some Welsh people in the audience. I could hear some accents, but it wasn't. People were there because they're a great band.
Yeah.
But also they have no desire to sing in English. They have no desire to expand their language, their fan base by singing in what's effectively their second language. Yeah. So I guess the point I was making with that is that there's nothing that says you can't sing in a minority language. There's nothing that says that you can't sing a minority language and not make it, not be successful, not be a career out of it. I think maybe I picked maybe a little bit unfairly picking on the hottest flowers, but 2 of them are fluent Irish speakers. As far as I know, they've never performed in Irish. Maybe they have, or maybe they've done, but I don't think they've recorded in Irish. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't think of any Irish band who had any significant output in Irish
Sinead O'Connor did
Sinead O'Connor, but
yeah,
but
songs.
but just it's literally on the level of a couple of songs as
Yeah,
distinct from a whole album in Irish, or even the thought of somebody doing a whole album in Irish is.
yeah.
But with Kneecap, this doesn't seem to be an issue. It doesn't seem,
No, no.
it's not even a problem. It's like it seems to have been. I mean, they are like they do interpolate English words in, and they
Yeah,
do
they do,
have and I mean, but even that in itself is a word away from the old rigid nostrums of learning Irish and
yeah,
as we did. I mean, I went to a Gaeltacht for 3 years. That if you spoke a full sentence in English, you were sent home. No, actually, it worked. Didn't speak
yeah,
a full sentence in English, and you were allowed to use English words in between in a
yeah,
sentence.
yeah,
And I came away knowing a fair bit of Irish. And actually, that was pretty liberal, actually, when I think about it. But at the same time, you know what I mean by the rigid nostrums of
yeah,
Irishness, that you had to learn Irish, and it had to be very sort of, it couldn't be vernacular, it couldn't be colloquial, it couldn't be broken down into a flexible sort of structure, as with Kneecap, where you can use
yeah,
English as well as
yeah,
Irish. And it strengthens the language.
yeah. Of course it does.
It makes it living language. It's alive. I mean, there's so many aspects of like they don't really have like albums. They've got murals and have
Yeah,
installations and they have a film and
yeah,
like they've got all these different things. And there was a thought that struck me, which was that you were saying in the book very strongly, like, you know, about how everything has changed. But in some ways, they seem to have risen above the change to take a societal prominence, which we'll come to in a second, because their political stances as well, which is part and parcel. But they seem to have risen above that to get a prominence, which almost harkens back to the days when, if you were on the Late Late Show, you had made it in Ireland.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I just wonder what you think about that, or if there's a reason for that. Can you think of a reason for that? Because I'm bemused. While liking them, I'm bemused, I guess.
So one of the so the last time they played in Leeds, right? I remember I can't remember which one of them. I think it was Nisha said at the end,
Mm.
you know, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Thank you for being here. It's great to be back in Leeds. It's the usual stuff people say. So the one thing, I mean, I'm sure you all know this, but like nobody makes any money out of recording anymore. So this is our livelihood. So it's really important that people come out and see us.
Mm.
And some of that was, promosing, but I think they understand that. I mean, they're a band who've been in existence since 2016, so they're nearly 10 years going.
Mm.
I think the first time they put out something that you could actually go into a record shop and buy was last year.
Mm.
All of their other releases have been effectively YouTube videos, and then shared onto Spotify and onto all the other platforms and so forth.
Mm.
But they exist in a world where the physical media that you and I grew up with have no relevance to what they do.
Yeah.
Like when I bought their album in Jumbo here, the only copy they had was the copy that was on display. Because people my age are not buying it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not going to consume it that way.
There's another angle which you make a really important point. I mean, I don't want to say everything in the book because I think everybody should buy the book and read the book on its own terms without us mediating it, even you as the author mediating it for people. But it's like you make another point about it, which is the utilization of the tricolour.
Yeah.
Not simply around them, but physically by them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to remember the last time I saw them, if the tricolour was on the DJ podium. I have a feeling it wasn't.
Mm.
I could be wrong though, but they had an amazing sort of visual presence. I mean, now that they're able to do bigger stages, they use projections really, really well,
Mm.
and a great deal of thought clearly goes into it, and a great deal of work goes into those animations.
Yeah.
DJ Provi still has the balaclava.
Mm.
Now that I think about it, and I don't think I talked about this at all much, but the use of it with a band from Northern Ireland, where the identification of the flag as the flag of the Republic gets mixed up with the whole flags and emblems things. It gets mixed up with the whole history of it being illegal for a long time or the whole flag and emblems act is actually kind of complicated, but it gets it was sort of that you could get arrested for flying a tricolour in Northern Ireland in the 60s and into the 70s. So I suspect that's what they're referencing more than any. I mean, I guess I would imagine, like most nationalists in the North, they have no particular desire to join the Republic as it is.
Mm.
They have a very clear idea that they want a different Republic. I think the flag is both. I'm guessing here now because I haven't actually thought this through, but I'm guessing the flag is both referencing earlier struggles and also maybe suggesting, that shimmer of the Republic to come.
And the willingness to use it as well. They're not.
And willingness to use it, yeah.
Yeah. Particularly when I was looking at the movie, I was thinking to myself, it's like they're there fully positioned inside a Republican discourse.
Yeah.
For the love of God, they have Jerry Adams make a cameo. And yet at the same time, they're also celebrating a sort of hedonistic thing, which feels not oppositional to Republican discourse, but certainly it's not unwilling to raise questions which previous generations of Republicans would have, at a minimum, raised an eyebrow and probably gone a bit further than that. I mean, the utilization of drugs on a sort of recreational basis, etc., would be only part and parcel of it. Yeah. But then again, maybe that's just a reflection of the times that we live in, and you know.
Well, I mean, in terms of, I mean, again, it might just be my distance from it or something like that. But I mean, cocaine is literally everywhere these days.
Yeah.
Go to a football match, and you can tell straight away that half the people around you are on coke.
Go to a gig.
Go to a gig, the same thing. Yeah. So, in a sense, they're not even reflecting youth culture anymore.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
They're not reflecting anything that's very specific to Belfast or anything. They're not even representing something that's very specific to them. And not being moralistic about it. Again, some of that comes from hip hop. Some of that comes from, I mean, American hip hop celebrates all sorts of drug use and abuse.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
in very explicit terms. So I think some of it might come from that. You see, I think one of the myths, one of the things that people in certain media commentators in the Republic think about when they just have that paranoid fantasy of the Army Council deciding what a Sinn Féin councillor does in Laois or something like that, and you know, they're reading this. It's some of that
McDougall approach,
yeah. Some of that is the establishment belief that somebody has to be in charge because things can't just happen because people are too stupid to do stuff by themselves. So somebody must be running this stuff. And I think one of the fantasies is that West Belfast is completely controlled by the godfathers of the IRA, something like that. There are plenty of people who are Republicans in West Belfast who are very, very cynical about Sinn Féin, I think. There are an awful lot of people. And again, I can't remember the woman's name now. Is it McGlinchey who wrote the book about the discourse?
Marissa, we interviewed her. Yeah.
I mean, that was an eye opener for me because I think I had sort of swallowed the whole story that, you know, anybody in any of these organizations, I know people in Irish, so I'd always assumed they were the exception. But actually, the belief that, you know, these people are stupid because they won't get with the program. It's a lot more complicated than that, and I think
big time. Yeah. Even if one disagrees with their approach, it's much more complicated.
Yeah,
they're not idiots.
Yeah, I was reviewing something recently where somebody talked about the unique tendency of Irish Republican organisations to splinter, and I remember thinking, have you ever been near a far left organisation?
Look at the Basque.
Yeah,
I mean the numbers of ETAs.
Yeah.
Almost actually, yeah. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about left-wing organisations. Yeah, absolutely. Anywhere, everywhere.
Yeah, but also, even your question sort of suggested that, you know, in an earlier time, Kneecap wouldn't have been allowed to do what they did.
Well, that's an interesting question. I wonder if they've been noticed. They might not have been noticed in the same way.
Yeah,
because I think back to, and your book again deals very comprehensively with punk in the north, and I mean Northern Ireland punk was a different beast to punk in Dublin, but it had its own dynamics and its own tonalities, and yet it lived a section apart. And yet you also make the point this was true of punk everywhere. It was always an oppressed minority kind of embattled or goths as well, come to think of it in Leeds. You know.
But I also think as well that the whole, I mean, you got this from we get people like Stuart Bailey, you get it what's his name, MacDonald?
Henry MacDonald.
Henry MacDonald, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, it was a time where, you know, we were walking down the street and the RUC stopped us and they couldn't believe that we all came from different parts of Belfast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lovely story, and it's not untrue, I don't think. I mean, people did live this, but equally I can remember from punk in Dublin that you had people, you know, from Anglo-Irish families who were in Trinity hanging out with kids from the flats.
Yeah.
But it didn't last. These people did not end up, you know, they're not still friends 20, 30, 40 years later. But certain communities of effect or something like that can create these temporary communities.
Yeah.
And in the context of Belfast, I think it was taken, oh my God, look, the kids are united. Isn't this wonderful? But without sort of understanding the dynamics of the subcultural dynamics of it.
maybe we should actually touch upon the fact like Kneecap have become even more prominent in the last 3 weeks or
Yeah,
4 weeks, due to their
they got job.
due to Gaza and
Yeah,
Palestine and willingness to articulate. Although I noticed as well, like people are digging back into their stuff from 2 or 3 years ago
yeah,
in order to mine them. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's obviously an attempt to sort of to
yeah,
show up.
yeah, yeah.
One of the things I noticed, I don't know if this answers any of this, but Heavenly, their record label here, managed to pull together messages of support from from other bands, basically.
Yeah.
And a lot of Irish bands obviously signed up to this.
Mm,
And as did quite a few figures in British music. Paul Weller did,
mm,
I think Billy Bragg, Pulp did, Primal Scream, Massive Attack, obviously. What I remember thinking was that, with one exception, which was a local Leeds band English teacher, very few of the bands that signed up were younger bands.
really?
And I remember thinking about this. They had too much at stake.
Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, Paul Weller can, Paul Weller's got a free pass. Massive Attack, already very committed, and
Mm.
people know what they think.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be surprised. But I think that the terror that young bands have of stepping out of line, the terror of being slaughtered in social media for something, the terror of being quote unquote cancelled, means that there are very, very few bands in their 20s that are prepared to do anything that would articulate politics in more than a, wouldn't it be nice if we all got on together kind of way.
Yeah.
Certain things are okay. Trans rights, yes, and all of which it's important. I'm not
Absolutely, yeah.
remotely diminish it or anything like that.
Yeah,
But,
of course, yeah.
but in terms of sticking your neck out about Palestine, for example, I think there's a lot of bands in this country,
In Britain, yeah.
in Britain, and even more so in America,
Yeah.
who would be terrified to say anything
Yeah.
for fear of what it would do to their already fragile livelihood.
Yeah. Which maybe makes Kneecap's willingness to articulate these things at their age, because they're still pretty young. They're not.
They're 30ish at this point. I mean, they're not.
Yeah. They're not
maybe young as they look.
Well, I mean, yeah. They're young enough.
Yeah, well, from our perspective, yes.
They're younger than everyone on this conversation.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, you're right. And yeah. And maybe it is that they've got a sense of cultural capital behind that they have a cultural capital now and a base that isn't going to abandon them.
Yeah. Also, Irish bands, I think, have that. I was just reading Murder Capital had a gig cancelled in, I think, Cologne.
Yeah,
Really?
I saw that, yeah.
Because they had a Palestinian flag on stage and refused to remove it.
God's sakes.
And the venue put out, well, we don't allow any national flags on stage. I'm sure if they put a tricolour, there would have been no problem.
Yeah.
But
Don't invite Kneecap.
yeah,
But this isn't Germany where it's getting policed to
yeah.
absurdity at this stage, isn't it? So yeah.
But I think Irish bands. I think Irish bands have. I mean, I noticed that I was home for a couple of weeks over Easter, and I mean, I knew that support the way Irish people were viewing the conflict in Palestine is different. But I was still surprised at the number of Palestinian flags I saw, the number of murals I saw, and in small towns we were in West Cork and then in Clare and so forth. And so I think Irish bands have the security of knowing that whatever happens, the rest of the country sort of has their back. Whereas I don't think that's true for bands elsewhere.
Yeah. I think it's a very good point. It's funny because it casts my mind back to what you're saying about the conflict itself, say during the early 80s when Irish punk really was AWOL on the issue pretty completely, let's be honest. And then you get Sunday Bloody Sunday and a few other little bits and pieces. Though there were, in fairness, some honourable exceptions. But it's like, I mean, part of me, I'm sympathetic because those are huge issues. I feel less sympathetic today. But sorry, because it seemed huge, but it also seemed intangible and impossible to solve. Whereas I feel less sympathetic to groups today who aren't trying to at least make a little bit of a stand. Jeepers.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I know from a fairly close acquaintance to a generation younger again is that there is distinctly a stronger sense of Irishness and maybe even, and I say this very tentatively, an openness to the Irish language and so forth. And certainly an attitude that groups like Kneecap are representative of something that people find attractive. And I'm talking about people in their mid to late teens.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, what do you think that symbolizes in terms of, I mean, the book itself is, as Rebel Notes, and it's popular music and conflict in Ireland. But what does that tell us about the situation in 2025 in terms of where this goes? I mean, is this another musical dynamic interrelated with politics where we've hit a certain point, or do you think this speaks more about the future and what may happen in the future?
Well, my daughter's in her mid-30s now, and I noticed that about it, like when she was a teenager, that a much more positive sense of what being Irish was, far less deference to the rest of the world, a much greater confidence. So she finished school in 2008, and
Right, okay.
just as the crash happened, and I remember like herself and her contemporaries had this huge resentment at our generation for screwing it up, basically. But I think also there was also a determined her sense of herself as being as an Irish person is very different from mine.
Yeah,
it's much more confident, much more straightforward in ways that I think growing up when we did, we weren't able to have that. I don't know.
It was more contingent.
Yeah,
I mean, the stars of heaven. Not to drag them into the equation all the time, but just a certain record sleeve. When you think that it was almost government policy to see our generation go to London, go to New York. I went to London. I have friends who never came back from either London or New York.
I've certainly been transferred. But the first time the Stars played in London, I knew most of the front row.
Yeah,
all the front row, and they were all people who had left over the previous couple of years. People I'd forgotten had left, and people I'd forgotten. Oh yeah, that's where you are now. I mean, again, my daughter will kill me for this, but of her generation, quite a few of them went abroad for a while. They're all back. Of her close friends, almost all of them are back. One or two exceptions where people married somebody, but nothing like my generation.
So that's an interesting reflection on an assurance and confidence, and a very different worldview. Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and so in a way, the Kneecap themselves fit right into that, a sense of they're not really put out in the way we were all put out. We were put out. We were literally put out of the country in some respects, but it was like there was an anxiety there and a sort of sense of. And I mean, maybe, and this is something I do ponder these days, like, we're very lucky in the sense that the economy is buoyant and that there's essentially, in economic terms, full employment, because we have other problems, as we know, not unrelated to people waving tricolours in a very bad sense, as against the Kneecap sense, who would make hay if we had mass unemployment.
Yeah.
And I do kind of think maybe that's one of the good things about not one of the good things, there are many good things about Kneecap, and even in fairness, the Wolfe Tones, like, they do seem to have set themselves, they seem to be set very determinedly against that other vision, that very narrow parochial. The Wolfe Tones themselves, in fairness, and Jesus, you name yourself after Wolfe Tone, you had to have a certain degree of republicanism in the best sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think that's a fair analysis, or?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the Wolfe Tones' views on immigration are or anything like that. I wouldn't put words in my mouth. I would assume that Kneecap would be sound on the issue completely. Can't imagine. I mean, they owe their livelihood to black music. I can't imagine. Mind you, that's the stuff Eric Clapton anyway. Many others, but anyway, the book ends with a sort of reflection on the rise of the far right and the rise of certain racist feeling in Ireland. So this is something, one of the, I think, and just going right back to what we were talking about at the beginning, one of the things that politicized that made me sort of aware of the connections between music and politics was work against racism. And realize, I mean, it's possible to overstate how effective it was, but I think for an awful lot of people, and I've confirmed this with people here who remember, who are my age, but remember going to the RA or carnivals and things like that. And they'll talk about how, suddenly the words that friends of theirs would use, the sort of things people would say about black and Asian people, they suddenly realize, no, you can't do that. You can't say that. And it's stretched from that particular mobilization. And the Socialist Workers' Party were, for a far left party, it was something concrete that they did. I think by the end of the 80s, that had spread to football. I think the idea of throwing bananas at a black player just became suddenly something that, not that people didn't do it because they were scared of it, but you didn't do it because your mates would just take the piss out of you. I know from talking to Irish people that who maybe don't know this country as well as I do, that there's a sense that, there's a strong rightward drift here, and it's full of ignorant white racists who, are just ripe for. I mean, the country is ripe for the right, but a lot of that is the fault of the left, or what used to be the left. But also, there's I have to say, it's a confidence about race in this country. Like Bradford which is 7 miles away, is UK city culture this year, and the celebration, and it's not artificial. It's celebrating a city that is incredibly multicultural, to use a word that I'm not particularly fond of. But it's impossible to imagine Bradford without its Asian population, and not to imagine its Asian population as a problem. They're what make the city, and I think everybody in the city knows that. And I really think Britain has moved to a lot of Britain, not all of it, obviously, has moved to the point where whatever Starmer thinks he's doing by whatever he's doing, most people kind of like the fact that it's the way it is. And I think Ireland's a long way from that. I think Ireland, there's a lot of congratulating ourselves for not being racist like those bad Brits. But I really think there's a gaping chasm into which all of that could fall, because people haven't thought through what they actually mean.
Yeah. And
what having a society that is very different from the society they grew up in, very different from what they imagine our society is. All that social media stuff about immersion heaters and stuff like that, and mammies and all that kitschy Irish stuff that you get. It's complete nonsense. Ireland was never like that. Yeah. But also it's a way of like, let's have this conversation among ourselves, and let's keep those people over there.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much for talking with us today. And we'd recommend everybody should read this book if you're at all interested in republicanism or popular music and Ireland and culture in Ireland. And thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.